I like that. That's really good. Well, happy Father's Day. I know that being a father is the second hardest job there ever was. You know the hardest, right? Being a mother. That's exactly right. I told my mother many times the only job that I didn't want was hers. And fortunately, I didn't have to have it. But it is really good to be with all of you. Beth and I have looked forward to coming. My wife is with me. She's sitting back here by Jason Crowell, who happens to be her nephew. I guess he's my nephew by marriage, too. I like him. I'm glad he is. But we're glad to be here. As I said, we've looked forward to coming and being with you and spending some time with you. We just finished back home. We just finished a VBS 2 weeks ago. And then last week, we finished a lectureship. And now this week, we're at a VBS up here. So I'm just kind of on a roll. So we're just going to kind of keep going. But again, it's a pleasure for us to be here. We had dinner with the Binghams and with the Morrises last night. And when I tell you I'm glad to be here, I really mean it. And if you want to know what that means, ask Phil. But I'm really, really glad to be here. Good to see you this morning. We're going to talk about several things, especially over the course of VBS. As has already been announced, your theme is being an anchor, having an anchor. And I've looked forward to presenting the things that I've prepared because those lessons are lessons that I have had to give some thought to, and I hope that the thought that I give I'm able to articulate so that maybe I can say some things in our adult studies that can help you. But I do appreciate the fact that I have been asked to come, so I want the elders especially to know. I got to meet Scott this morning and Jenna, and man, what outstanding people I can tell they're really good, and that's wonderful, and I'm thankful that they're here working with you, and I'm anxious to get to know them better. Hopefully that can happen over the course of the week as well. I want to start this morning by showing this. Last night Phil said the best music came from the 80s. I beg to differ. The best music came from the 70s. How many of you would agree with that? 4 or 5. Okay, well, we'll all stick together, fellas. That we'll just stay with it, okay? But there was a song by Queen. I don't normally talk about Queen in my lessons, but I am this morning. There was a song by Queen in 1975 called Bohemian Rhapsody. Freddie Mercury, who was the lead singer for Queen, wrote the song. I debated whether or not I would sing part of it for you, but I think I'm going to pass and just show these particular lyrics. At the beginning of this song, Mercury wrote, "Is this the real life?" I know as I'm saying this, you're singing it in your head. I know, because that's really what I want to do too, but I'm not going to do that. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Caught in a landslide, no escape from reality. Open your eyes, look up to the skies and see. If you've never heard that song, you ought to go back and listen to it. It's one of the most bizarre songs you've ever heard. Really, I love the song, but it is bizarre. But what's even more bizarre about the song is that Mercury wrote the song in which he was trying to really determine for himself who he was. He had some issues in his life. That's documented very well. And he wasn't altogether sure who he was or even how he was. And there are some things that you may or may not know about him that were very concerning for him. And so he wrote this song in part because he was trying to figure himself out. And I would suggest to you this morning that a lot of folks are trying to figure themselves out. And I think it's very hard. I just want you to think about that with me this morning as we talk about this idea of an identity crisis. I think a lot of people have one, and a lot of people in our world. How many people approximately populate the world? Anybody know? See, girls, this is where I was going to need your help. I was going to ask you questions, and y'all were going to help me. Okay. So y'all don't know? I can't believe you don't know how many people are in the world. I'm just kidding. How many? What'd you say? She said 8 billion. Is that unbelievable? That is great. That is great. Approximately 8 billion people are in the world. How about the U.S. of A? How many people? About 300 and what? 335. That's what I found yesterday, and I think that's pretty close. 335 million. Let's narrow it down. Where am I going next? Kentucky. How many are in Kentucky? Yep, a little over 4 million, about 4.5 million from what I can find out. Okay? Where am I going next? Louisville. Well, let's just go to Louisville. That's about I found about 1 million. Does that seem right to you? 1 million? I don't know if that's metropolitan. I don't know how all that works, but that's kind of what I found. Here's my question. Of those 8 billion people, and let's narrow it down. Let's say most of you who live here, you know people in Louisville. Let's ask this question. Of that 1 million people approximately who live in this city, how many of those 1 million know who they are, do you think? You're looking at me like, what are you talking about? This is what I'm talking about. I think most of those 1 million people have no idea who they are. And I guarantee you, most of those 8 billion people have no idea who they are. And it may be that you're here this morning and you don't know who you are. When I came in this morning, I introduced myself to some of you and you introduced yourself to me. And when we shared that information, we gave each other our names. That's what we do. But that's not who we are. That may identify us and it may make us distinct from somebody else. But that really doesn't identify who we are. And that's what I want to talk to you about this morning, because I am very confident that if you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going. And you don't know how you're going to get there. And there are a lot of questions that either remain unanswered or not answered correctly because you have no idea. And part of why I want to present this lesson this morning is because I think this lesson, for me anyway, this is of primary import for every single person, but especially for younger people. There's so much concern in our day and age, and I'll speak to this a little later on in other lessons, but there's so much concern about who someone is and the difficulties of trying to determine that and what their life is all about. And so that's why a lesson like this, it seems to me, is important. This is, when somebody says to me, or when I have an opportunity to study the Bible with someone, this is the first lesson that we talk about. This is what I talk to them about first. But before I talk about Jesus, before I talk about salvation, before I talk about anything that relates to that kind of thing, I talk to them about this because I think this is essential. And that's why I want to talk with you about this morning. So we're talking about who we really are. And I want you to think about that as we talk about these things this morning. That was supposed to go off. Okay, here we go. So a lot of people don't know. And so I want to ask you this particular question. I want you to think about that if you found yourself on an island, you just found yourself there, and here's the situation. You don't know anything. You have no knowledge of anything, but you can reason and you can think for yourself, okay? That's the scenario. That's the situation. You don't know anything, but you have the ability to reason and think. Somebody tell me one question that you would ask yourself. What's one question you'd ask yourself? What? Why am I here? That's good. Why am I here? What else? How do I get off the island? That sounds like a reality show of some kind. How do I get off the island? That'd be a good question. What else? Where exactly am I? Okay, that would be, I think that'd be important. What, you think of anything else? What? What about water? All right, do you have fresh water? Okay, all right. I hadn't thought about that, but that's probably right. What else? How did I get here? There's one more that stands out, at least to me. All right, is there anybody else? That's not it, but that's a great question. Is there anybody else? What am I going to eat? Where am I going? Now we're rolling. You see, what am I going to eat? That's really important to me. All right, where am I going? What else? Well, I won't ask how your marriage is, but that's the first time anybody's ever said that. All right, what else? Real quick, what else? Shelter, need shelter. Okay, there you go. Who am I? You don't know anything. Who am I? I was hoping that we'd get to that a little quicker, but that's okay. Who am I? Okay, so we've got three questions. Who am I? Who put me here? Or how did I get here? Why? And then, why am I here? So the three, in my judgment, the three primary questions are have to do with identity, have to do with origin, and have to do with purpose. Don't you think those are important questions? If you know who you are, if you know how you got there or who put you there and why you're there, if you have those three questions answered correctly, you're going to have a life, I think, that's purposeful. At least it's more meaningful. And that's the problem. I think every single person asks themselves those questions. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you live. Everybody wants to know those questions. Now, most people, as I said to you, I don't think have the answers to those questions. But at least those are the primary questions. And I want us to think about those for a few minutes this morning as we think about this. Several years ago, I was in Folsom, California. This is a long time ago, really. And I was staying with some folks there, and they had a daughter who was away at college, so I was staying in her room at night. And as I would do, I would look on the bookshelves and just try to see what the reading material was up there. And she had this book on her shelf, and so I pulled it down, and I thought, the big questions that fascinated me. And I pulled it down, and what I found out, it was a textbook for a philosophy class for the California Community College system at the time. And this would have been about the mid-'80s. And when I pulled it off the shelf, I asked the man whose house I was staying, I said, tell me about this book. He said, it's my daughter's textbook at the local community college. It's a philosophy book. And as I began to look at what all was in it, these were the things that were in it. Reality, God, morality, evil, humanity, purpose. And it just solidified in my mind that everybody has those questions. Everybody's trying to find out what is real. We're going to talk about that more on Tuesday night when we talk about truth. They mentioned God, and as I kind of perused in that chapter, different concepts and different ideas of God, but they wanted to talk about that. Morality, what's right and what's wrong, evil, humanity, and purpose. These were things, but can you imagine how a class like this is taught in a community college system in California? Can you imagine? That was 30-something years ago. But I'm telling you, the reason that they're having classes like this is because everybody wants to know the answers to those questions. And of course, for the Christian and the one who believes in God, and this is not an apologetics class or an apologetics talk or anything like that, but I'm assuming a few things, that we believe that God is and the Bible is His Word. And so we turn to the Bible for the answers to these particular questions. And so when you turn to a passage initially like Genesis 1, 26 and 27, you begin to understand some of the answers to these particular questions that we're talking about. I have determined that every sermon could start with this passage. I just want you to think about that briefly. Every sermon could start right here. Because this has God, this has us, this has who we are in reference to God. And so the things that we discuss in sermons, the things that we discuss in classes, the things that we discuss with our kids and talk to our kids about, they all relate to this fact that we're made in God's image. Genesis 1:26, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female, He created them. Now just stop with me and think. If every one of the 8 billion people in the world understood that, would we have fewer problems in the world? You talk about fewer problems. The problems would collapse. The problem is, most of those 8 billion people have no clue about that. And if somebody did point it out to them, they might not believe it. Probably, at least some of them, I don't know if it's the majority or not, but wouldn't believe that because they don't understand what that means. And if we don't understand what that means, I think it puts us, as we sometimes say, behind the 8 ball. And that's where so many people find themselves even today. They don't know who they are. And we're made in God's image. What is an image? What's an image? See, when I ask a question, I kind of float back over here because it worked out so good last time. Anybody, what's an image? A copy, that's good. It's a good word. Some people say likeness, but that cheats. That's up there, okay? But it's similar, right? An image. Is the image the actual thing? No, that's not what we call it. An image it's a shadow-like thing, but it imitates, but it's not, right? How many of you have ever seen my father? One, don't answer. Okay? Let me see who I want to ask this to. I'm going to come back over here. Rhea, I want to ask you this question. You've never seen my father, right? Would you think my father's handsome? Yes. That two fist pump for that. Two fist pump. Okay. I appreciate you saying that. My father is about 6'4", 6'3.5", and that's about as tall as I am. A little bit overweight. He's lost a lot of weight. I have too, believe it or not, some. But he's pretty tall, as I said. And when people see us together, they might conclude that we're father-son. If they saw us do certain things in the same room the same way, they would certainly conclude that we are the same or that we're father and son. But we're not identical. I'm not him, and he's not me. But there are characteristics and there are features about my father that I have gotten. Could be from a gene pool. It could be that that's just because I've been around him, that I've learned things from him. But I look like him, but I am not him. That's exactly, it seems to me, what that's telling us. We are like him, but we are not like him. And there are parts of that we very much understand. He transcends us in all sorts of ways. But there are ways in which we are similar to God. So I want to ask you a question. Tell me some ways that we're similar to God. Spiritual beings. That's a great one. We're spiritual beings. And we're not going to talk a lot about that, but we're spiritual. We have a spiritual side, okay? That's one. What else? Ability to reason. That's right. We have the ability to reason. We have the ability to think, and He's given that to us. Those are two that I have. And I'm not going to put up an exhaustive list, but of the three, those are two that I have, those first two I mentioned. Can you think of anything else? I know you can, but what's something else? All right, we can love, okay? And I think that we identify some of that is we have a sense of ought, okay, of maybe what we ought to do. And that has to do with morality. And part of that has to do with the fact that we love each other. And we have these certain characteristics that we have that we can convey to other people, okay? So let me just stop there. I think we could go on for a long time talking about particular characteristics, but let me just stop there and look at these three things. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? We have a spirit side. We are spiritual beings. And everybody has that. They may not fully realize it. They may not fully develop it, but they have that. And there's nothing they can do about that. They have that whether they want to or not. And I might say this. Any human being, given the choice, cannot say, I don't want to be made in God's image. Every single person is made in the image of God. And they have no choice in that. That's who they are. Okay? So everyone has a spirit side. We are moral beings, which basically means that there is something, I think, innate about us that helps us determine what is right and what is wrong. Do you think there's confusion about right and wrong in this world? It's chaotic. I can't even think of a word to describe it. It's out of control. And that shouldn't be the case because we are moral beings. Now, we're moral beings with free will, and I get that. But nonetheless, we are moral beings, and part of that is because we're made in the image of God. And then the focus of what I want to talk about is what this gentleman said, which I love. We can reason and we can think. We can reason and we can think. Therein lies the thing that all of us have to do. If we're going to recognize how God has made us, this gives us one of the primary differences in us and other parts of creation. And I want to look at that for just a moment. In Psalm the 8th chapter, beginning in verse 3, the psalmist David said, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. You have made him to have dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, even the beasts of the field, birds of the air, and the fish of the sea that pass through the paths of the sea." David wrote this psalm. And I think David probably wrote this psalm when he was possibly tending sheep on a Judean hillside. Don't know, but there are some things in the statement itself that make me think he's paying attention. Tell me some things that David did. David was this is a fill-in-the-blank portion. Shepherd. David was a king. This is going well. David was a man after God's own heart. David was a warrior. David was a king. We mentioned king. What is today? David was a father. Cheater. Now we're moving. Cheater. Murderer. What else? Adulterer. What did Saul recognize him as early in his life? He was a handsome and ruddy in appearance. Okay, I wasn't quite expecting all that, but yeah, that's what he was, Scott. You're right. And did he play anything? He played music for Saul. Okay, evidently he was a harpist. I did this. I guess I thought he was a saxophonist, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, I was this is years ago, yes, and I was talking to the kids. I don't remember exactly where this was, but I asked some of the same question, and a little boy raised his hand, and I said, "Yeah, tell me what David was." He said he was a magician. I said, "You mean a musician?" He said, "That's what I said. He was a magician." And I said, "Okay, I think I know where you're going with that." But it was good. He was a little bit confused, but that's an easy mistake to make. I can tell you that right now. But David was a lot of different things, okay? And again, I think he does what a lot of us have done in our life. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers has to do with being able to create. David said, "When I consider the work of your fingers, part of which were the moon and the stars, which you have ordained, what is man that you're mindful of him, and the son of man that you visit him?" Those two statements in verse 4 are Hebrew idioms that basically mean the same thing in Hebrew. But he's saying, why is it that you're concerned about me? May I ask you a question? Do you ever just stop and ask yourself, why does God care about me personally? You ever do that? If you don't, I would suggest that you do. Because he does. He does. I think that's what David's doing. I think David's just stopping. And you know, if you're out on a Judean hillside and your job's a shepherd, and you don't have a cell phone, you don't have a phone at all, and you probably don't have the newspaper with you, I'm thinking you got a lot of time to think. And David asked some of the most important questions he could ever ask. As a matter of fact, the word that's used, he says, "When I consider." What does it mean to consider? Yeah, to think deeply. When you consider something, the phrase that I like to use is you give deliberate thought to it. You don't consider a lot of things that happen on a regular basis that are fairly commonplace. But I can promise you, when you're about to buy a house, you think about it. You consider it. You give a lot of thought to it. You have a lot of discussions about that, probably with those that are important to you. About, is this house something we're going to do? Those are important. Before you go to school somewhere, especially if you're in higher education, you give some thought to where you're going to go. You think about that, and you weigh your options carefully. And you think about that, not just for a short period of time, but you give some thought to that. You consider that. Before you marry someone, you think about that. You give considerable thought to that. So that's an important part of what you do when you consider something. You give deliberate thought to it. David says, I am thinking about all that you have made. And then he says, I'm going to compare myself to some things that are in creation. And he begins to talk about some things. And I just want to mention 3 or 4 of these things to you. He talks about the moon and the stars. He says, which you have ordained, which you have created. Let me ask you a question. Tell me something a star can do. This is a short list. Give off light. What else? What? All right, provide direction. Okay, that's good. A star is either burning or it's what? It's burning down. It's burning up. It's either burning or burning up. Typically, I don't say typically. I don't know what typically is for a star. But that's what it's doing. It's either burning, shining brightly, or it's beginning the downward flight, so to speak. And that's all a star can do. How much credit does the star get for either burning or not burning? 0. Does the star have any control over that? No. Who does? God. Exactly right. But the star gets no credit or discredit. That's not who a star is. That's not what a star is. Let's go a different direction. Although it's not explicitly stated in Psalm 8, I think it is implicitly stated when he's talking about creation, the things that God has made. What is that? That's a rose, okay? We all know that's a rose. Tell me some things a rose can do. Smell good. Look good. Kind of like me. Smell good, look good. Smell good, look good. What else? What? Stick you. So it's a thorny rose bush, okay? Stick you. Anything else? Wilt, okay? So, but basically, a rose is either in the process of blooming or what? Or dying. And the rose has really no control over that, right? You may have rose bushes in your yard, and probably the reason they look good or they don't has a lot to do with you. But it doesn't have anything to do with the rose. The rose gets no credit or discredit for what the rose does. Okay? How about this? What's that? That's a puppy. That's a cute puppy, I think. That's a cute puppy. Tell me some things that a dog can do. Now we're going to expand. Tell me some things that a dog can do. Tell me something. He can make you feel happy when you're sad. That is great. That is a great answer. That is a great answer. That's exactly right. What else can a dog do? You don't get another answer, Rhea. What else? Learn commands. Good. What else? Make a mess. Good. What else? Alert you. Good. By barking. Okay, good. Chase cats. Good. See, that's why he's part of your leadership. See how this is real. This is great. Yeah, okay. There must be a backstory to that. I'm not sure. What else? Let me ask you a question. Can dogs reproduce? Why does a dog do that? That's right. That's exactly right. God made them that way. And they act on their what? Instincts. Instincts and urges. Instincts and urges. Let me ask you a question. Do you have any instincts and urges like a dog? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you treat those instincts and urges like a dog? Don't answer. Because I'm going to tell you something. If you treat your instincts and urges like dogs, God calls that sin. God calls that sin. Part of why he calls that sin is because dogs don't think like you're supposed to. Dogs don't consider like you're supposed to consider. But dogs do what you do, and you do what dogs do, and you better understand the difference between you doing those things and dogs doing those things. And here's what I'm going to tell you. Most of those 8 billion people don't understand it. And that's part of why we've got the problems we've got in our world. Because most of those 8 billion people don't use their minds the way God intended for them to use their minds from a moral, spiritual, ethical point of view. And David said, I'm not like a star. I'm not like a flower. I'm not like a dog. I have the ability to think and to reason. It never enters a dog's mind. It never enters a male dog's mind when he turns 16 and he looks across the street and he goes, you know what? She doesn't look like she used to look. And I don't feel like I used to feel. It never enters a dog's mind to go across the street and knock on the door and say, may I see your daughter? I'll tell you what enters a dog's mind instinctively. He goes across the street and what? He takes what he wants. And we've got too many people in our world who are not thinking and they're taking what they want. And I'm not just talking about in a sensual, more specifically sexual way, although that's probably where we understand that concept even better. But that's part of the problem. People don't know who they are. And David said, we ought to be different than that. So what does it mean then? What do I take from this? Here's what I take. I am a different person. I'm different than all the other parts of creation. I tell you folks, if you don't get that, you're in for a great life. And you're in for a very long life. And if you're acting today in your life without God in it and without understanding that you are responsible to God, and we're going to look at 3 things in just a moment, then your life's not going to be what He intended it to be, and you're going to continue to be in an identity crisis until you realize what God wants from you. So because we are made in His image, we have a relationship. I'm not talking about the relationship of a Christian to his Savior. I'm not talking about that right now. I'm talking about from a humanity standpoint. Every person, every single person is made in God's image, and we have a relationship. What always comes with any relationship. It's another word, starts with an R, and it's long. What is it? Responsibility. Every relationship has responsibility. Now, I would tell you, I don't think you think of any relationship that doesn't come with responsibility. I now have a relationship with you. When the elders called me and said, would you come and would you speak at our VBS, that establishes relationship with us. At least it does with them. They asked me and I said, yes, we have a relationship. Now, do we have a responsibility? Do they have a responsibility to me now that they've asked me to come? Yes. Do I have a responsibility to them and to you now that you asked me to come? Yes. What if Phil would have said what he said this morning before I got up here, and I would have stood up and I would have stood here? Just stood here for the next 45 minutes. What would you think? I've lost my mind. He's having a stroke. Something. Okay? But the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is because I have a responsibility to you. When you marry, when you say I do to someone, you have a responsibility to them. When you give birth to a child or when you father a child and a child comes into the world, you have a responsibility to the child. And when you don't accept that responsibility, I think you sin. I know that's a strong statement to make, but part of the problem is we want relationship a lot of time and we don't want responsibility. Relationship's the fun part. It's the responsibility that's the hard part. Same was true of God. Every single person wants the relationship. And I believe most people want the relationship that's even extended. But what always comes with it? God said, I want you to be mine, but here's who you're going to be. And you don't have any choice in that if you want to please me. That is responsibility. And the responsibility, what always comes with responsibility. Here we go, another long word, but it doesn't start with an R. What is it? I know I'm kind of catching you off guard this morning. Relationship, responsibility, and accountability. Let me ask you a question. Do you think most of the 8 billion people in the world understand those things? Here's a more fair question. Do you? Do you get that? You have a relationship. Most of us, I would think, we have a special relationship with God in the sense that we have, because of our free will, we have accepted Jesus on His terms because we want to be forgiven of our sin. We have a special relationship with Him. We are His church. We have that special relationship with Him. But because of that, we have responsibilities. Each of us, we have responsibilities individually. We have responsibilities collectively. But we have responsibilities. And what's going to happen on the day of judgment? God's going to do what? He's going to hold us accountable. He's going to hold us accountable. Now, again, let me just ask you. Do you think most people understand these things? No, they don't. And so that's why when I sit down across the room from someone, sit at a table across the room, and I say, and I ask them those questions. And you know what's interesting is that most everybody I ask comes up with the right questions. Who am I? Who am I? Who put me here and why am I here? And I said, those are the questions. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about it. Let's open our Bible, see what God says about that. Now, if we're not to the point where they believe in God or that the Bible is His Word, we don't start there. We start at another point. But if I get an affirmative to those two questions, I believe in God and I believe it's His Word, I say let's open it. And let's find out who you are. And if you find out who you are, you find the right answers to these questions and you accept fully the responsibilities that God's given you because you know He's going to hold you accountable, then you're good to go. That's why over the rest of these lessons we're going to talk about what God expects of us. We're going to talk about it in your classes with your kids. We're going to talk about it here. That's why we continue to talk about it. That's why you continue to come and Scott continues to preach and teach and help. And because that's what we're interested in. Finding out what it is that God wants. Thank you very kindly. Appreciate it.